We recently released cross-platform 2.0.2, and in this session we want to give a small overview of some of the new features that are available. We're going to do that with some demo coding, so I'm just going to create a sample project. So in platform 2.0.2 there are several new modules. Several modules that have been updated. In the session we're mainly going to show new features and changes that have been done to entity module and to WebCMS module. So we'll do that by making some small modifications. We'll see some more technical stuff. There's some new functional features which we'll demonstrate, and some things are small, some things are a little bit bigger. So let's start first by simply starting up the application. That should still work. This is where we wait a little bit. In the meantime, I'll already go to where I want to be. I'll start with some changes on entity module. So I just created a sample project from Initializer where we have like the example blog with some example entities and stuff like that. I just wanted to use this to make some modifications that show some of the new small features that are available. Great, application is running, so we've all seen this. I'll just go to the... So one of the things is now through all the modules we rolled out the new logo. Which everybody likes very much. That's just a very small thing. So one of the small changes that we made is, believe it or not, but it was not easily possible to change the main labels of menu sections for entity management and module names. So we made this now possible by introducing some new message codes. So if we now want to like change the main label, we can do entity module.admin menu is manage your content, right? And the same goes demo application module, for example. Admin menu is the main, manage your blogs or blog management, whatever. So that's very easy now to make some minor modifications to the admin menu like that. Another thing that we have made slightly easier for development, I'm going to show you. For example, if we go to a blog post, okay. The Bootstrap UI module, which is used intensively for generating the interfaces, has always had the Bootstrap UI factory, which is a singleton bean which you need to wire to create your view elements using Bootstrap UI. But we started realizing that actually all those Bootstrap UI builders don't hold any state, and it's very hard for them to mock them anyway. So we have now created a static facade where you can easily access all the Bootstrap UI builders. So it helps you do some little things like, for example, this, let's say on the blog post I want the author property, I want to create a custom view element builder. For the control, in the past we would have to then wire the Bootstrap UI factory and use that one. Now we can do something like, let's say, Bootstrap UI builders. I want to create a container and I want to add to that container a glyph icon. So this is just now a static facade. It just helps keep the code a little bit cleaner and avoids wiring some of the components that you we need. All right. So there we go. Yeah, I changed the control. I should have changed the label because this is a pretty pointless control. That's just a small cosmetic change, actually. Not much else about that, but what is now also possible is entity query language. The EQL statements, they support sorting, which makes some certain things a little bit handier to illustrate while it's restarting. Let's create an extra author. Right, if I go to blog post, let's say I have a blog post here, I have here The author list, now let's say that I will only want to see all authors that start with, that contain the word start. Then I could just go to author and there configure an attribute, the options entity query, which would be in this case the default entity query that would be used when you want to have a list of authors wherever you want to select authors, and there I could do the author name contains start. So that's another one of the things that is now possible using contains on text filtering. And what is new is I can also order them by name descending, for example. So that's been added to EQL statements, and behind the scenes there's been some more changes that when you specify it like this, the option iterable builder, which is backing this whole setup, will now automatically see, oh, you're using an entity query which is sorted, so I'm not going to resort, not going to apply the default sort, which is sorting them by name ascending. If I now refresh, I see they are sorted descending and they are filtered on start. Of course, you don't need to do any actual filtering. You can just use only ordering, and you can use multiple properties, just like in SQL, basically like that. So that's one of the small changes that we made that also can be handy for configuring your entity screens. There we go, still sorted, but the other one is in there now.
So now I'm going to show you a little bit about filtering. You all remember the filtering that was available already, being the EQL statement filter that we can find in for users, for example. Where you can say email, I like admin, and then it will filter on emails. For our web articles, for example, we can have different publications, different article types, and lots of titles, because we can have lots of articles. Let's create a blog article, and let's publish it. And now we can start building our filter. Filters happen on the list view, and what we used to do was just say true. Now we can add a configuration instead, and we can say define which properties we want to show. So we have publication, article type, and articles can be published or not. But that's in publish settings. And you can also define whether we want to have multiple options that you can select. So for example, we want to select multiple publications, then we can say multi-value. When we now refresh, we should have two modes. So we have a basic mode and advanced mode, where you can start selecting different types and filter our list view. The basic mode actually just creates an EQL statement that we can then find in the advanced mode. We can filter on multiple things together. So now you have publication news and article type blog. It's never going to happen, but it's possible. So what we did was we selected multi-value for publication, so we can select multiple publication types and filter on them. By default, it will be using an int statement. And we didn't select a multi-value for article type, so we can only filter on one specific type. And we can also filter on title, for example, blog, and then it will use a contain statement to search inside the titles. You can also create a fictive property, which then redirects the filtering to multiple other properties. So we can say, let's filter on text, and then it will redirect the filter to searching inside titles and, for example, contents. There's a how-to about that on the entity module documentation. Aside of filtering, we also have a few additional improvements for WebSense module. For example, when we create components, we can create all of the components, but we see it already that some components that we used to know are no longer in the list. For example, proxy components or placeholders. What we're going to do now is create a few of our own components, and then we're going to show you how to filter those options. So we're going to create a few component types. For example, sample components, which has a name, it's on its own, it's a fixed container, so the type is fixed container, and we're going to add some child components. Which we're going to use in minutes to show some additional improvements. Now we also need to import these components, and we don't have an importer yet. It's going to extend abstract WebSemist installer to and here you can add the file we want to import. When we now reload, so what we did was create a component. It on its own is a fixed container, so it cannot have you cannot add elements to it. You can delete elements from it, and it's going to contain two elements, being a name and a body, which is name is a plain text and the body is a rich text. And we have another typo. So you can see that it already tried to import the file. So refresh the page, and then we have a sample component that we now can create, which has a name and a body. Now let's say we don't want anyone to be able to create that component everywhere, then we can just add another attribute, being component restricted, and we set that to true, and then the option is no longer going to be available by default in any selectable option for a container, but they can still be created by using code or when you import them. So it's only on the admin interface that it's restricted. So it's no longer in lists. Now we can also define other components, and we can say we only want to have these options available. So we're going to create a sample container, which is going to by default going to be visible, and then we can say child components restricted. Now you can create a container, and when I want to add elements to it, at the moment there is no option available because we didn't say these options are allowed. That's something that's already available, so we can add type links, and we just specify which types can be imported. Let's give these an object ID. It's easier to work with object IDs, especially when you're using imports, because they will be randomly generated. And a specific link type that we need to use, which is allowed components. And we can do it with multiple components, for example, rich texts. And now we can select those two types. Now this interface is okay, but let's say our end user doesn't really know what to do with these fields, and we want to add some additional descriptions. And we can also do that through message codes. There's a short name for WebCMS components, so let's use that one. And then we can specify our component name. Well, no, we're working inside sample components, and we want to say description for all of its members is the components you can find inside. And now it should be visible. Now we can also add descriptions below our components. So for example, let's say we want to add an additional description by name to our body components. And we also add description above, just below the label and above the input field by using just the description field that we used here above. Now we can also add WebCMS, we can also add placeholders for text fields. Well, text field that use text WebCMS component model, but in which text fields they don't really show yet, probably because of a function inside TinyMCE. So let's add a placeholder to name. Probably in contents. Now we have a placeholder. We have a new feature called asset links. So we just actually use type links to create our option that should be available for a container. Now we can also add asset links. For example, we have our article here. Let's create another article called another article. And now we can just define some assets. Assets require an asset to link to, so we're going to link to the article that already exists. And we need to specify a link type, and that can be anything because assets don't have default configuration yet, so we can just define our relationships and how we want to call these relationships. For example, this is a related article. This is very useful because it's an object to asset link, so we can really use any WebCMS object and link an asset to it, and that way we can create completely fictitious links between different objects. If you now go to asset link, we should have one. This one has versioning. It's also a good practice to use versioning for your assets when you import them, but types, when you regularly change them, it's okay to use always run because they shouldn't really have a lot of impact on creating new items. So now we have an asset link which refers from an owner to another article.
Okay, so what Steven just showed us, the links, the type specifier links and the asset links are things mainly useful for developers to use them behind the scenes for easily linking objects together without having to create custom tables for everything. But one of the major features that actually has been added to WebCMS module 003 is multi-site support, multi-domain support. So in this example we have been looking at a single website. So if you look here at the admin, we have like a single section where we have all the content items that we can manage. But we can easily switch to a multi-site setup by activating a multi-domain configuration. And the way to do that, the easiest way to do that is, I'm going to do two things just because it's a demo. But the most important part is you just need to configure a web CMS multi-domain configuration bean. That you can customize. So in this case we are just going to say we want to manage our entities, the simplest of all, we want to manage our entities per domain, meaning as we'll see in a second that all the assets which were now on a global level by default will be moved to per domain level. You will not be able to create an article shared over all domains anymore. You will only be able to do that per domain. So I can illustrate creating a domain. I'm going to simply make the domain configuration visible. This is not usually how you'll do things, but for the demo this will aid me a little bit and show some of the basic options you get with it. So now all I did is create the bead, restarting the application, but now everything should go into multi-domain mode, and I hope that we didn't add anything that will break in the configuration settings before. Because usually switching to multi-domain is something you want to do from the start in your application, because you do need to take care of your data model and things to be multi-domain aware. The default data model of Web CMS module is multi-domain aware, meaning all the assets work either in or out in the multi-domain setup or in a single domain setup. Let me just re-log in. Admin. So now what we see here is that the Web CMS module has all the asset links have disappeared, but here I get this little icon with a home, and all I have is an options shared settings, which is the level I am currently on. Because I have not created any domains in my application. So I activated the Web CMS domain entity because I want to simply create a fake domain right now. Usually you're going to import your domains using YAML, for example, because you want to specify, you want to hook up a site configuration to it that specifies the actual DNS names, cookie names, etc. But that's all documented. That would go a bit too far for this demo. So I'm just going to create a new site, but without any actual configuration behind it. But you'll see as soon as I create here an active domain, and I go here, that I get a second option, my site. Let me create another one, another site. So if I now go here, I have two domains. If I switch to a particular domain, I see a lot of other menu items have disappeared. That's because they are not domain bound. They can only be managed on a shared settings level. And now I can create assets linked to that domain. For example, I can create a new article, say a new article in the news publication test. So I have here an article test. Do I switch to another site? If I go to the articles, I see that I don't have the test article there. So assets are now linked to a particular domain, and you can actually go and configure very easily. Let's see if maybe I can give a small demo of that. Which asset types should be domain bound, which not. By default, it is doing all basic Web CMS asset implementations are domain bound. Let's see, because that is a common case. For example, we want to say that domain ignored types contain the Web CMS image. We don't want Web CMS image domain bound. I think I'm going out on a limb here because I don't really know it by heart. I would have to check the documentation. But we have here image on the domain level. Always too fast. Yep, and now we don't have it anymore on the domain level, and if we go to the shared settings, there we have images now. We can, that would lead us too far. You can reactivate images and then still work with like the shared repository for images. That's a common use case. Just simply show it on every domain so everybody can add images, but it's shared across domains. But in the other case, for example, with articles are separate per domain. So this is probably the biggest feature that has actually been added. It's a basic setup. It works quite fine if you use imports with website configuration, but if you would like to want to actually do it like this, create a new domain and have an actually new functional website, you would need to add some stuff to dynamically create the website configuration with DNS names and stuff like that. Technically the setup is there, the user interface is not. So that pretty much wraps up the most important features of 2.0.2 release, which is a combination, as you saw, of technical and functional features that have been added. Now I'm going to give a very short sneak peek of the next release, what we are working on. We are currently working on Across 3.0.0, which will not be a functional release. It will be a more technical release, because our main focus point is improving the compatibility with standard Spring Boot applications. So I opened one of the new projects we have of Across 3.0.0, and I want to show you a simple example of what is different. This is an Across application just as you know it. The only difference is that, like with regular Spring Boot, we have put actuator on the class path, and our module has an actuator component, a health indicator. In the current version of Across, you would have to manually activate actuator support and insert the right configuration classes and stuff like that. In this version, you do not have to do that anymore. We simply put it on the class path, and if all goes well, Again, I didn't test it, but yeah, we see that the actuator endpoint is there, but we don't need to do the special configuration we had to do in the past to get the Spring Boot configuration to work with Across. Another improvement that you have with that is now that we fix the inspection that you can get here in IntelliJ, because if you run an Across 2 version, these endpoints things will not work. They do with Across 3.0.0. That's also part of the improved compatibility. And last thing that we're working on, which is already pretty much done, is if you look at the logging, we structured the logging a little bit better, so you have a better overview of, okay, these modules will bootstrap, and then a clearer separation of when each module bootstraps, which should help us a little bit in development, debugging and stuff like that. So that's the focus for 3.0.0, improving compatibility. We really want to try to make most of the auto configuration files of Spring Boot to work out of the box with Across, in an Across setup, because Across still is different fundamentally from a traditional Spring Boot application. But we're working very hard to make it more transparent and easier for developers to work with that. That's the focus of 3.0.0, and we hope to release 3.0.0 still end of this year or beginning of January next year. Okay. It will also be an upgrade to Spring Boot 1.5.7, but that should not really pose much problems for most projects. That's it. Thank you.